Hello and welcome to episode number 41 of the Hafey Digital Podcast, a show for creators, makers, and doers, where my goal is to help you make to the max. My name is Ryan Hafey, and in this episode, we're going to talk about Joe Rogan's new podcast set. Spoiler alert, it needs some work. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the show, everybody. Episode number 41. Fantastic. Having a good time. If you are joining me, wherever you happen to be joining me right now, be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow me on social media at Ryan Hafey on Instagram and Twitter. Let's have a conversation once this is all said and done, because those are fun. So today, yes, we are talking about Joe Rogan's new podcast set. Of course, we've got a few things to cover. Before we get to that, for example, beverage for today, you know what, I'm not working with anything special. We're just doing a Diet 7-Up. Reason being, I was going to go with a Coke Zero. It was a Coke Zero, Coke Zero kind of day. But I've had enough caffeine already this morning, and this seemed like the next best thing. Wasn't in the mood for some sparkling water, so we're doing Diet 7-Up, all right? You're going to have to pardon the bubbles, though. So, sound of the week. Let's talk about that next. So, the sound of the week last week was... That is the sound of closing a Pelican case. You traveling photographers and videographers will know that sound. This is this week's sound of the week. If you think you know what that is, leave a comment wherever you happen to be watching or listening. And at the end of this episode, of course, this works better if you're watching live. And then at the end of the episode, we will reveal what this sound is. All right. Fantastic. Okay. What's next? We got sound of the week. As you can tell, we are going a little bit earlier today, and that is because I have taken on a new project that's going to be taking up more of my Sunday evenings. So the 6 p.m. Pacific Sunday time for the podcast may be no longer, at least for a little while. So we're going to try and see what a Sunday more midday afternoon time frame looks like for a little while here. But that's really the only other update for the week. So let's get right into the main topic, because we have a lot to talk about with this. And that is Joe Rogan's new podcast set. There will be some visuals being introduced in this episode. So I recommend that you do go and watch the video version of this. Although if you happen to watch any of Joe Rogan's the video version of his podcast, and if you've seen his new set, then you'll be able to get at least an idea of what I'm talking about, as long as you've seen it. If not, I will be throwing up some visuals just to take a look at. But let's get into it. So by the way, before we talk about the set specifically, a couple things to keep in mind as far as his situation. So a little while back, Joe Rogan announced that he is moving to Texas and leaving Los Angeles. And with that, obviously, he's bringing his podcast set with him, which he has, and it's built and it's up and running now. He's in Texas. He's had a few guests on his new set. I fully acknowledge the fact that most of Joe Rogan's listeners and viewers are not going to care about any of the stuff we're discussing today. But, this is a podcast about, lighting and gear and photography and video. So, for us gearheads and for us who out there who like and appreciate quality lighting and sets and things like that, we're just here to kind of have fun and critique the top podcast studio really pretty much in the world. I don't think Joe Rogan really cares about any of this, but it's just fun to talk about. So we're going to talk about it. So before we get into his current set, let's look at his old set. So this is a screenshot from of his episode with David Blaine, which happened just before he left for Texas. And I don't mind this old set. I don't mind it a whole lot. Like it was fine. It sort of became iconic. Of course, there are little tweaks that I would suggest if we were going to be switching anything up within this old set. This particular frame, and I actually took this screenshot twice because I looked at a different portion of the video and it came back very dark, which I thought was strange. But yeah, I think this just maybe a little tiny bit underexposed. But it's a nice shot that kind of shows what's going on in the room. It shows both of the guests. It shows all the cool knickknacks and things like that are on the desk. And it's neat. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to pay attention to. Cutting to, let's say, some of the individual shots. So in each studio, he has 3 camera angles, one being a wide shot and then one being shots on each guest. So this in the old studio is Joe's shot, his solo shot, and the lighting is decent. Exposure looks good. You can see on top of his head, he's got a couple of bright lights. Probably be good to see that maybe a little bit more diffused so they don't look like hot spots on his head. But if someone had hair, it would probably look more like a hair light. There's no real depth to the lighting necessarily. It's just kind of flat, consistent lighting throughout, but it's not bad, and the colors look okay, I think, especially for something that's live streamed. If we go here, this is the shot for the guest shot, and it's got a completely different background. It's got that dark purple background, which I kind of like the fact that the guests would have a different background than the host. It creates a separation where they don't seem like they're disjointed or, too far separate from each other, but it sort of gives them just a little bit of separation between host and guest, which I'm okay with. So, and then again, same thing with the lighting there, nothing flashy with the lighting. It just looks like, kind of generic or just all around lighting. I think they use some LED light panels instead of something softer, like this big softbox I have here. But yeah, it is what it is. So with that in mind, again, that was the old set. Let's go in and talk about the new set. Now, let's see, we'll bring this up here. Oops, sorry about that. There we go. This is a screenshot of the new set, Joe Rogan's new set. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Man, the first thing that I noticed, well, obviously you have these great looking things. They look like, I don't know, like grill grates almost, which it's kind of cool. It gives it like kind of a Tron feel. I don't hate it. It doesn't bother me, but, and I assume that what those are, because of how thick they are, is sound panels. I don't have any critiques, by the way, to give about the audio. I think the audio sounds great, which it should. If it's going to be a podcast, it probably should have some decent quality audio. So we'll get beyond that. It seems that, in this new set, they have done some good soundproofing. What I would say is that it appears, without knowing any of the numbers, it appears that square footage-wise, this new set is very similar in size to the previous set. Just by kind of looking at it, it looks like, if you just look at the size of the floor, it looks like there's just about as much room in this set than the previous set. But to me, this new set looks much more closed in, I guess. And obviously that's coming from the fact that you have this sort of dome shape in the room. You have this dome-shaped roof versus just kind of straight up and down walls. And I'm not a huge fan of that because it feels like this is strictly from a video perspective. If you are someone who frequents the video portion of this and you want to just kind of watch this as a viewer, rather than just a listener, if you're looking at this set, it feels very just tight, and like you almost feel like you're not supposed to be in there, or like you're in some kind of secret bunker, or like there's just not a lot of room around you. Like you just feel sort of out of place, like you're not allowed to be in this room as part of this conversation because there's no room for you. That's just sort of the vibe I get. And I think, again, just because this dome-shaped studio that's just sort of squeezes everything in and compresses everything in on the inside. And then on top of that, you have these sound panels they look to be at least a few inches thick, and that's just making it even tighter. What's up, Matt? Matt chiming in on the Facebook chat says, I hate the new set. It's like 90s tribal tattoo. It's like if 90s tribal tattoo was a building. Exactly. I feel the same way. And we're going to rip it apart today because it's definitely not cream of the crop. But yeah, so there's that. I think the other part of it too for me is that it almost looks like a car. Like if someone said, I need you to make a fort with a domed roof out of cardboard, and you got to paint it red. That's kind of a weird way to describe it, I guess. But that's how it almost looks like it's made out of just sheets of cardboard. And you'll see that more when we get into the individual shots of Joe and the guest. But let's see, what else did I put? Yeah. I would also, because the space is so small, looking at least, for this quote unquote wide shot that shows everything. Yeah, technically you can see both the guests in there, but I would say you'd want to get much more of a wider angle, get a wider lens and get more in there so that it feels like more of an open environment. Again, I don't know. There's just something about it. It's like, I feel like I'm not welcome because it's such a small space. But anyway, let's cut into Joe's shot here. All right. So first of all, let's talk about framing. I think there's an obvious framing issue. Now, right now, Joe is looking to his right. However, he's looking more towards like the production area. If he were looking more straight on or slightly if he was looking more straight on because they're sitting directly across from the table, that's where his guest would be. Now, if you've ever seen an interview on TV, or you've seen, you kind of know about the rule of thirds being, instead of lining up your subject, of course, there's always creative exceptions to this, but instead of lining up a subject directly in the center of the frame, you put them on either the right or left third of the frame. And if you're doing interview style content, unless you're intentionally trying to create tension and kind of give off that feeling to the viewer, you wouldn't want to cram. Like this would be like me. Okay, here, hold on. Let me go back. There we go. Imagine, okay, so right here, I've got all this free space in front of me here where I'm kind of talking to the camera, and it feels open, it feels inviting. Now, if I go like this, wait a minute, nope, I gotta go. Let's see. Nope, I gotta turn, there we go. Let's just, hold on, I gotta get the camera right here. Let's imagine instead that I did the interview like this. Like, what's going on back here? Why is there all this excess space back here? And why am I only have like, it almost feels like you're in a super close quarters conversation with someone, like someone's in your personal space. So there's not that much room between me and the edge of the frame. It feels more tense. It feels like more close quarters. And then there's all this wasted space back here nothing's happening. So I hate moving this camera around because I always got to realign it, but I'll do it for illustration purposes. There we go. So, but if you have something more like this, it's a little bit more inviting. There's extra space. And I mean, at least in this case, it's also functional because I've got my screen here. If I have things up there, you can kind of see what's going on there. But that's sort of just interview framing 101 is you want to have the open space in front of the subject. So if I'm, if the camera's here and if I'm looking over here, just gives plenty of nice open room and it's more inviting for the viewer. But this is not very inviting. And the same thing goes with the guest. They did this for the guest and the host shot, which it doesn't feel right. It feels off. I don't like it. I feel like it's even worse than it was. This is the most recent episode that I could find, but I feel like the framing was even worse in previous new set episodes. So anyway. All right, so talked about set, talked about framing. Like I mentioned, they do have the three different shots, the wide, the host, and the guest. Talked about the field of view for that wide shot. So now let's get into lighting. So one thing you'll notice, first of all, let's talk about accent lighting. Actually, let's go back to the wide shot here. Let's talk about accent lighting. If you look at all these like orangish yellow lights in the background, those are cool little accent lights. The problem is they are way too bright for the exposure of this scene. If you look, you can kind of see how, like, in their brightest areas, it's just one solid color, and that's usually an indication that it's overexposed. So like from here all the way over to here, those shots are overexposed, and they're probably creating, there's just these hot spots, and you can't recover that. It doesn't look natural. And it's it's very distracting and overshadows the lighting of the subjects, which, by the way, is bad in and of itself. So, God, where do I start there? So for starters, if you look at Joe's face, it's just like one solid color. It's so flat. There's no contrast. I don't understand what this is about. I understand, the need to want to make sure that everything is well lit in the studio. But look, these lights, and I know I'm using my mouse here to point at things and you can't see them, so I'll try to explain that better. But like the yellow lights in the background and along the sides on the dome walls there, those could look really cool in that space if they were much more dim. Because right now they're so bright that they're overexposed and they're distracting. And then on top of that, you've got these big, just kind of LED light panels mounted up to the ceiling that for whatever reason is shooting light towards the camera. I don't know what purpose those lights are trying to serve other than just sort of general lighting for the whole set. But, why would you want to backlight everything? So we're going to talk too about what I would do if I did this, if I was setting up the studio, what I would do differently. But it just doesn't make any sense to me why you would put those two light panels back there. Again, outside of just general lighting, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. And then to go back to Joe's shot here, if you look at his skin, and actually look at his skin here. And then, look at his skin here. More natural looking, maybe a hint on the green side. Then you go here and it's super red. Why is it super red? Well, two things. Number one, the freaking walls are red. And you have all of this red paint, you just bouncing off the walls and onto his skin. Of course, you're going to get red skin. I suppose you could fix that in post or, with some white balance adjustments. But otherwise, that's going to be avoidable. What are you going to do with all that red reflecting light? It's going to bounce off something somewhere. So there's that. And by the way, you can kind of see the creases in the wall behind Joe. And that's sort of where I get that cardboard vibe from. It just looks like pieces of cardboard that were bent and shaped into a dome. I don't know. I don't like it. It's not for me. Yeah. That is just, and there's no, so with me here in my studio, let me go back. There we go. So this is my studio space. Obviously the camera is shooting in this direction most often, but I've got one light source here that is shining down on me. And if I'm looking directly at the camera, you see that this side, and of course the hat kind of messes things up. I know I wear hats and I shouldn't. Hey, look, I'm bald. Oops, sorry. But, if I'm looking directly at the microphone, you see you've got nice, even lighting on the right side of my face. And then you've got a little bit of light that kind of creeps in on the left side, and then it's kind of dark, and it just creates a little bit of contrast. It creates a little bit of drama. Not too much, not unnecessary drama, but it's flattering lighting, and it just looks kind of cool. But let's fix my hat there. But if you have something like whoops, that's the old one. If you have this, where's that drama? Everything is just evenly lit. You can see some hot spots on his head, again, probably from LED panels. He doesn't have something like this big softbox that's going to spread everything out, and maybe he doesn't have the room in there for it, but he could definitely benefit from something like that. And then if you look at the guest, so here's the guest shot again. Framing is off, skin is red, lighting is flat, no contrast. He's got a little bit of hair light on the top. Again, that kind of illustrates what I was saying earlier about, if Joe had hair, he would have a hair light. So it works more as a hair light and a rim light on the guest, which is fine. But there's no other lighting that's, nothing else it's just all flat and looks ugly and washed out, So, I don't know, man. I mean, if you go and look back at some of Joe's old, like his last podcast set, but in the beginning, you can see that they made tweaks and improvements over time. And I'm sure they're going to be doing the same here with this one. But right now, what they've got, man, it ain't it. So let's talk a little bit about, oh, by the way, and also, I pulled it into just a screenshot of Joe's angle. I pulled that into Premiere so we could look at Lumetri and kind of give you an idea of, now granted, yes, I'm aware that, I'm aware that, sorry, I had to adjust something there. I'm aware that this is a screen grab from YouTube, and this is not going to be entirely natural representation of the actual colors in the most high quality version of the video that was captured for this. Let me bring back me there. But just to kind of show you here. So these measurements over here are measuring kind of what's being seen in this screen grab here. Now, if you go from left to right, it's going to match up with this sort of color channel histogram style thing on the left here. So you can kind of see where things are overexposed. You got basically things like across the board that are a little bit overexposed. You can see that yellow that's overexposed right there, up in the top left corner. And you can see on the histogram down on the bottom left there, where it's really loaded at the top. Normally a histogram is more on its side, but in this case, it's turned 90 degrees clockwise. You can see how everything's loaded up on the top. That means that you've got a lot of overexposed things going on there, and a lot of those, highlight pixels are being crammed on the right side. And because they're overexposed, you can't get that detail back. Same thing on, make this a little bigger here. Same thing on the darks. You've got a lot loaded up there. So interestingly, in a scene that is so flat with not very much lighting, you still have a lot of, technically a lot of contrast, although it's pretty evenly lit throughout. But yeah, man, let me bring this back down. I know this doesn't look the best, but we're going to work with it here. Another thing too, is that if you look at I believe it's the vector scope, YUV, you can see, so from a broadcast standpoint at least, this outer line here is an indication. If you have these spikes that go outside of this line, then that means that you're oversaturated. This is all your different color channels. So if you're spiking outside of that line, at least from a broadcast perspective, you are oversaturated. And what colors are they oversaturated in? Shocking. It's red and yellow for the most part, which are the two primary colors that you see there. So, they've got some things that they need to take care of as far as just really everything, really balancing out the lighting, probably dialing in those picture profiles. And there we go. Dialing in those picture profiles and if they're getting a look out of camera, they need to go in and play with those, those picture profile settings so that they can get a better look coming out of camera, because that ain't doing it. So that's just kind of let's say more technical look at the I don't know how you would put that, but just it's a more technical look at the flaws of his new podcast studio and the framing and lighting and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but if it was me and someone hired me to come in and let's see, there we go. Someone hired me and said, hey, I want you to come in and fix this studio. What would you do? What would I do to fix the look of the studio? For starters, those two lights in the back, they got to go. Those two LED light panels, not the little accent lights, excuse me, but they got to go. They just don't serve a lot of purpose. They take some of the attention away from that cool backdrop that's back there. Like you just got little, whatever that elephant thing is, or I don't know, but it's a cool backdrop otherwise, but it's just taking away from it and it's not benefiting the thing. So get rid of those. And then we're going to turn down all of the accent lights. I would say go to where you can expose the guest and the host nicely, and those accent lights aren't going to be blown out. I don't know if they built in the ability to be able to do that, to be able to dim those lights, but it needs to happen. I don't actually mind the red and orange look, although I think, anytime you have contrasting colors, that's part of the reason why I have this teal light here, and then I have some red lights over here. Technically, the complete opposite of red is green, but teal is also a good contradictory color. So maybe getting in some, I think if they put green lights in there, it would probably look a little too Christmassy, but blue or teal, something like that might go well, or even a combination of the orange lights with some of the teal, maybe the teal behind the sound panels, who knows. The other thing I would do is, you almost have to just repaint the whole thing. I would paint either a black on the inside or like a white, just something that's not going to bounce a bunch of unwanted color on the skin. I would say, just kind of given Joe Rogan's nature, I would go with a black and then use just some creative lighting to, give it a little bit more visual interest. Yeah. I mean, white's probably going to look the best for skin. Black's going to absorb a lot of light, so you're probably going to need to pump more light in there. And depending on how it's ventilated and how much space you have, black may not be the best choice if you need a lot of light. But yeah, one of those two colors. I would say, what I would do? I think I would paint the walls like a gray or a white. And then I would keep the red sound panels. I might even keep the red in the back, although that's going to blend in pretty well with the skin tones, and they're not really going to pop. So maybe just all around gray or white, and then use some red accents with some like teal lights and orange lights, a combination of those. That's going to help with the skin tones. It's going to help with just contrast and having them pop more. And then what I would do is I would get some soft boxes and some decent video lights. Again, something like this, again, if there's room. And I would set up two of them. One of them on the right pointing towards Joe, and then one on the left pointing towards the guest. And angled, maybe 1.5 to 2 feet or so above eye level. Because you don't want it necessarily to come directly from the side. You'd like it to come angling down a little bit. And if you can, let's say if you're doing it across the room and they're talking to each other, then you're going to have some of that shadow fall off, or that, some of the shadow on the right side of the face, which is what you want. That creates that visual interest. And then if you're able to kind of direct that lighting, it's going to focus more on the guest. It's going to take some of that overall lighting away from everything else. You look around too, there's a lot of harsh shadows and things, especially created from those lights in the background. So the focus should definitely be on the subject and the guest, or on the host and the guest. So you want to use creative lighting. So I would have to make them pop. So I would have one on the right side and the left side, and then those lights would be pointing in opposite directions to light up each of the hosts. And beyond that, with all that accent lighting, you really don't need much else as far as lighting goes. Because what else do you really need to illuminate? I might consider putting some track, like I had these little LED strips, putting some of those on the ceiling above the guest to kind of run down the length of the ceiling. And that can be your rim lighting. It's not going to be in any of the shots that you take, or any of the frames, any of the different camera angles. And it can live as a rim lighting, which a rim lighting or a hair light is what's that kind of highlight that you'll see on people's heads, and it'll help to sort of separate them from the background a little bit. Let's see. What else would I do? And I think that's about it. There just needs to be, and then, as far as like the space, those critiques and those different ways to kind of spruce things up, that's based on the assumption that we can't change the room. But if we could change the room, I would say 100% go back to just something with square walls and sharp angles, because it's just going to look more open and more inviting. And like I said earlier, I would also use a wider angle lens on that wide shot, maybe even bring it down a little bit so you're more eye level. Because just looking at this angle right now, it almost feels like, again, it feels like I'm standing in the room because there's nowhere for me to sit, and I'm just sort of like awkwardly watching them, versus like feeling like I'm also a guest kind of hanging out at the table, if you know what I mean. But I don't know, man. You know, at the end of the day, he can do whatever he wants to do, and I'm sure he's going to fix some of these things over time. But yeah, I can't say that I'm super impressed with the new set. And I'm a big Joe Rogan listener, but I'm also a little bummed that at the end of the year, everything's going to Spotify. He's on Spotify now, but like, I think if I remember correctly, everything is going to be exclusive to Spotify by the end of the year. And I'm not a Spotify subscriber, so we'll see how that goes. Maybe I just move on. I don't know. Anyway, I think that sums up my critique for his studio there. So beyond that, let's get into the sound of the week reveal, and we'll call this one done. So once again, the sound of the week for this week was, and that is the unavoidable sound of opening one of those collapsible reflectors. You know what I mean? Like, you just kind of untwist it and just opens up, and yeah, there, check it out. So if you've ever worked with reflectors or like green screens or anything like that, and kind of collapses down, it's got that sort of rigid edge to it, you know exactly what that sound is. That is the sound of the week. And I think with that, we are going to go ahead and call this one done. So if you are still watching or listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you happen to be watching or listening, and follow me on social media at Ryan Hafey on Instagram and Twitter. Let's have a conversation once this is all said and done. But until then, I'm going to go ahead and call this one done. So thanks again for watching. Keep on creating, making, and doing, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.